That autumn evening in Payic, New Jersey was just beginning to grow cool, the sort of night when you could feel autumn arriving. Golden leaves swirled down the quiet streets of the town of slightly more than 50,000 residents. It was serene, mundane, until 19-year-old Elizabeth Thompson vanished. 10:15 p.m., Elizabeth, a freshman at Rutgers University, was last seen leaving a friend's birthday party wearing her navy blue jacket and the same sneakers she wore almost every day. Before getting into her silver Honda Accord, she texted her mom, "I'm coming home." A simple, everyday message, one that would later become hauntingly final. The witnesses recalled various things. One of them witnessed her driving away by herself. The other swore they had seen a black pickup truck following close behind her vehicle. Nobody gave it any thought at the time, but in the days ahead, that tiny detail would expand into an ominous lead. Before we go too much further with this story, don't forget to subscribe and activate notifications so you won't miss any of our deep dives into actual cases like this one.
In 2006, Payic was the epitome of suburban tranquility. Broad asphalt streets lined by giant maples, families cutting lawns on Saturday and Sunday mornings, and children pedaling bicycles home from school. The most newsworthy event was generally the high school football team's latest win or the fall festival in the park.
People here felt a sense of pride in how safe it all seemed. Elizabeth had grown up in the very center of that tranquility. She wasn't flashy or reckless, just solid, dependable, and suffused with unobtrusive ambition. She graduated from Rutgers with good grades, worked part-time at the community library, and always texted her parents when she was taking the jitney home. People called her cheerful and generous, the kind who remembered all your birthdays and never showed up late. That Saturday, October 14th, she joined a small birthday gathering at a home on Beverwick Road, just a few miles from her own house. It was nothing rowdy, some fast food, soda cans scattered around, and music playing softly from an old speaker. Around 10 p.m., Elizabeth smiled, said her goodbyes, and told her friends she needed to head out early. She had studying to do in the morning. 15 minutes later, she sent that now famous text, "I'm coming home." Her mother thought nothing of it. Elizabeth was always responsible like that. A friend saw her drive off, calm, focused, headlights cutting through the quiet street. Everything looked completely normal. But soon afterwards, a person at a nearby service station saw something peculiar, a black pickup truck trailing behind Elizabeth's Accord, driving in the direction of the Passaic River. No one could verify anything then, but later that image would prove important. Even spookier, the convenience store's CCTV camera on Elizabeth's usual path lost its signal for precisely 30 minutes, 10:20 to 10:50 p.m., the same time interval she disappeared. Coincidence? Possibly. But the first indication something sinister had occurred. Payic slept as usual that night, but by dawn the whole town would be on hold. When the sun came up, panic set in at the Thompson home. Mary Thompson called her daughter's phone again and again, each time sent straight to voicemail. Her husband, Richard, stared out at the empty garage. The silver Honda was gone. On Mary's screen, Elizabeth's last text still glowed faintly, "I'm coming home." By 9 a.m., they'd already called the police. Officers from the Parsippany, Troy Hills Police Department came to their house, notebooks ready, posing the same horrific questions any parent fears. The missing persons report went in, officially called Missing Juvenile Elizabeth Thompson. Even though Elizabeth was legally an adult, the police reported her as a juvenile case because she continued to reside at home and was not financially independent, a choice that, as luck would have it, would assure her disappearance a quicker response. The first hints arrived rapidly. Her bank card indicated its last use at 10:30 p.m., 15 minutes after she had left the party. Nothing since then, no ATM transaction, no online shopping. Her Verizon phone records indicated her last signal pinging close to Route 46 near the Passaic River, a desolate stretch with minimal lighting and fewer cars at night. That revelation devastated her parents. They understood that part of town. It was seedy, out of the way, and risky at night. Nonetheless, at the station, police were being careful. Others speculated perhaps Elizabeth had taken off for a few days. It was an all too familiar excuse. College kids occasionally went missing for a short time before returning. But her parents were furious. Richard pounded his fist on the table. My daughter is not that kind of person. She's more responsible than anyone I know. Mary spoke up softly. She would not simply take off, not with midterms coming up. But for that first protracted, agonizing day, the official report from the lead detective bore a single blood-curdling notation. No evidence of foul play. At the Thompson residence, feelings were running high. Mary's eyes were puffy and bloodshot from nights spent awake. Richard prowled the living room, enraged that someone would still think his daughter had walked out on her own. She wouldn't just walk away, he exclaimed, his voice cracking. Not Elizabeth. Not my girl. While the family struggled to be heard, the investigation continued. Detectives started canvassing Elizabeth's path home while poring over each available security camera and traffic tape along Route 46. They contacted highway patrol, neighboring businesses, and anyone who may have seen something, anything. And then there was the strange find. The convenience store camera along Route 46 had been out of commission from 10:20 to 10:50 p.m. The very same window of time, Elizabeth vanished. 30 minutes. Poof. The store clerk attributed it to a hard drive malfunction, brushing it off as coincidence. But for the Thompsons, it had felt too specific to be random. A glitch? Richard growled. At the exact moment my daughter drives by? To him, it sounded more like someone didn't want the footage made public. Yet police favored the runaway explanation, calling it voluntary disappearance. But in front of the Thompson house, the town thought otherwise. Within that afternoon, telephone poles and shop windows were plastered with posters bearing Elizabeth's beaming face. Payic, usually so placid and methodical, had become a whirlwind of panic. Neighbors arrived with coffee, bagels, and flashlights. Retired educators, teens, even strangers arrived to assist in the search. The tale erupted like a firestorm on local news channels, and under that increasing scrutiny, the police could no longer ignore it. By 10 a.m., the case had reached critical mass. A full-scale search was underway. Morris County K-9 units came, snuffling for the scent of Elizabeth through the woods. A New Jersey State Police helicopter made a sweep over the Payic River and woods along I-287. Some 200 volunteers equipped with maps, radios, and reflective vests to shine like beacons in the darkness fanned out into the darkness of those frigid October woods. The baying of dogs sounded through the woods. With each sudden sound, individuals paused, hearts racing with the hope that perhaps she might be discovered. 3 long days and it didn't cease searching. Even during nights, floodlights mounted on trucks lit up the forest floor a ghostly white. Dozens of voices shouted her name repeatedly, blown by the wind across the water. Payic had never witnessed anything like it, a town united as one, striving to bring a daughter back home. The attention remained fixed on a single point, the location where Elizabeth's phone last registered. The straight road from Beverwyck to Route 46, a brief bridge across the river, the route she would have taken to go home. Flickering streetlights, short shoulders, and just enough loneliness to make someone nervous. That was where the K-9 unit landed their most potent blow. One of the dogs, provided Elizabeth sure to follow her odor, jerked abruptly close to Route 46. It took officers down a tiny side road, unpaved and ending at a deserted truck stop. And then, nothing. The odor just disappeared. Police and volunteers combed the landscape, rusty trailers, flattened tires, a half-imploded shed. No sign of Elizabeth. A detective finally grunted nearly to himself. It's like she evaporated right here. But something did catch his eye. A tire track pressed into the wet earth was seen by an officer. It appeared to be old at first, until investigators matched it with the tires of the Honda Accord. Vehicles didn't match. These were wider, deeper ones from a heavy truck, probably a pickup or SUV, the same type of vehicle one witness had spoken of. Suddenly, that black pickup truck was not just a distant background detail. It might have been the second vehicle on the scene. The find was the first big turning point in the case. Yet, aside from those tire tracks, nothing else materialized. No purse, no phone, no struggle marks, just the river's constant flow and the rustle of leaves in the chilled October air. 3 days went by. 200 individuals had searched 15 square miles of woods and beach, but Elizabeth was gone. Hope was dwindling. If they had taken her, they'd done it skillfully, nearly surgically, with no trail to trace. At the Payic police station, frustration was palpable. Detectives argued over a dire new hypothesis. Perhaps this wasn't an isolated disappearance. Perhaps it was more organized, intentional. The unusual tire tracks led them to reevaluate all of it. The runaway theory was officially tabled, and along with that change came their first set of suspects. Investigators focused on 3 initial leads: Mark Reynolds, Elizabeth's former boyfriend, an unidentified older man seen arguing with her that night, and a group of young men spotted near the river. Mark, 20, lived a few miles from the shooting scene. He said he'd been home playing video games online with friends that evening, but detectives checked the game server logs and something didn't quite add up. His login times were different from what he said. Mark dismissed it, saying perhaps he hadn't logged out or perhaps one of his friends had used his account. It wasn't enough to bring him in, but it was enough to raise suspicions. Then there was a chilling remark made by one of Elizabeth's schoolmates. She remembered seeing Elizabeth fighting in front of the garage with a man in his 30s, someone none of the students recognized. He was tall, dark-haired, and appeared calm but agitated. The fight seemed intense. Elizabeth had been shaking her head, her tone sharp. Detectives posed the self-evident questions. Who was he? Why was he there? Who brought him? But nobody knew. And in the end, a third tip. A driver traveling in the vicinity of the woods along the Payic River at about 11 p.m. saw 3 young men standing near an old automobile, drinking and smoking. When headlights brushed across them, one of them turned quickly away, tugging down a baseball cap. At first, it was sounding like a coincidence, a bunch of kids just cruising around, but when police noticed that location was less than half a mile from the truck stop where Elizabeth's trail of scent ended, the coincidence didn't sound so innocent anymore. Did they see something? Or were they involved? No one knew yet. But the fear building in Payic was plain. Something awful had befallen Elizabeth Thompson, and someone in town was holding out on them. 3 leads. 3 possibilities. An ex-boyfriend with a jealous streak. An older man nobody could quite remember. And a group of suspicious young men hanging around by the river that night. Each theory had gaps, but each was just plausible enough to leave hope and terror in their wake. In their report to Morris County, detectives finally penned the words the Thompsons had been begging to hear. This is no longer a standard missing person case. Criminal activity, probably. The tone changed. Detectives started checking every timeline, re-interviewing acquaintances, double-checking alibis. Outside the station, meanwhile, the pressure continued to build. Elizabeth's parents talked to the press every day, telling the same agonizing truth. She had no reason to flee. Someone kidnapped her. Before long, the media did what the media always does. They speculated. Headlines hummed. Was the former boyfriend incapable of moving on? Did Elizabeth have a secret tryst with the older man? Or did Elizabeth get herself into trouble with the wrong group of people that night? The suspect list expanded quicker than the clues. And as everyone waited with bated breath to see which of the 3 leads would pan out, the actual clue, the one that would prove most critical, languished under the Payic River's dark surface. Months went by. The search limped along until a media bombshell sent everything askew. In February 2007, a Philadelphia newspaper published a headline that illuminated New Jersey. A barista at a coffee shop had spoken to reporters about a woman with brown hair, early 20s, who used the name Liz and had a North Jersey accent and a backpack. It was too good to be true. In a matter of hours, the story flashed across television networks. The Thompsons held the newspaper in shock, caught between the slim hope that their daughter was alive and the haunting question, if it's really her, why hasn't she called? The Parsippany Hills police were forced to take action. An investigative team was sent to Philadelphia to coordinate with local police. For 3 months, they scoured the city, studying coffee shop surveillance tapes, knocking on motel rooms, interviewing baristas and bus drivers. Some were convinced they had seen the girl. One even thought she'd overheard her say she was from New Jersey. The pieces fell into place almost perfectly. For a moment, even some investigators began to believe Elizabeth might have left voluntarily, that maybe, just maybe, she'd started a new life. But that fragile theory collapsed. The enigmatic Liz was a Temple University student from Pennsylvania, a young woman who merely resembled Elizabeth and happened to have the same accent. When she was brought into the station, she was surprised to find that she'd been confused with a missing person whose face had terrorized the tri-state region for months. The police issued their discovery, confirmed mistaken identity. No relation to Elizabeth Thompson. But rather than closure, it only intensified the confusion. Whispers started circulating. What if the Thompsons were mistaken? What if she truly did escape? Some local publications revived the runaway hypothesis, speculating that perhaps Elizabeth had felt trapped by expectations, the perfect daughter who buckled under pressure. Overnight, sympathy turned to doubt. Neighbors started viewing the Thompsons in a different way, with a combination of sympathy and unspoken skepticism. Posters began to vanish from store windows. Volunteer searches tailed off. And police resources migrated to newer cases. For Mary and Richard Thompson, it was hardening. Richard spoke to one reporter, voice shaking but resolute. My daughter was left behind twice, once the night she disappeared, and again by those who were supposed to safeguard her. The wild goose chase in Philadelphia hadn't only squandered 3 vital months, it had tainted public opinion of their daughter's innocence. The case gradually lost heat. And then the coup de grace. An internal investigation of the Parsippany Troy Hills Police Department revealed a string of appalling errors. Auditors discovered the original 2006 case files full of negligence. Primary witnesses such as the classmate who'd witnessed Elizabeth fighting with the older man and the driver who'd seen the 3 teens had been interviewed just once with minimal follow-up. Nobody had checked their timelines. Nobody'd gone back to the inconsistencies. And Mark Reynolds, the suspicious ex-boyfriend with the questionable gaming alibi, he was never officially re-questioned after the initial interview. Next was the most devastating news of all, the department's botch of physical evidence. Among the only few things recovered at the deserted truck stop was a muddy glove. Procedure called for keeping them in paper bags to maintain protection from moisture. Instead, they'd been crammed into a low-priced plastic bag and left in a climateless evidence locker. By the time they were tested in the lab, there was mold all over the gloves. The DNA was compromised beyond repair. A possible key to knowing who had been in that lot, lost forever. When the word leaked, outrage spilled out publicly. Local newspapers branded it a shameful chain of errors. The credibility of the department was destroyed overnight. Police detectives attempted to justify themselves, claiming that back in 2006, they didn't have today's forensic technologies. But that was irrelevant to the family who had lost everything. And so before television cameras, Richard Thompson stood tall, his voice breaking as he said, "My daughter deserved better. She was failed by the people who promised to find her." Within the station, morale was at an all-time low. Junior officers felt embarrassed, veterans felt violated, and somewhere in the midst of all the finger-pointing and remorse, Elizabeth Thompson's trail went cold. Just perfect. This paragraph is a beautiful culmination of the cold case period in Elizabeth Thompson's life, and your writing encapsulates the gradual emotional breakdown, institutional collapse, and the ghostly tenacity of her father with cinematic gravitas. Before proceeding, may I just verify what you'd like me to do with this part? For instance, rewrite it as a cinematic YouTube voiceover script such as your earlier ones. Cut it down to a leaner, documentary-type scene with more dramatic rhythm. Leave it as it is and proceed with the next chronological block, maybe the reopening of the case years later. Or do you want me to create the image prompt plus viral YouTube title, description, and tags for this section as before? Great. This is the ideal cinematic twist. The return of Elizabeth's car and the DNA clues switch your story from despondency to epiphany, establishing the emotional and investigative climax. Let's go ahead before we proceed further. YouTube script rephrasing, cinematic, a vivid, emotionally charged voiceover version like the ones you've been building for your true crime videos. Image prompt plus viral YouTube title, description, and tags optimized for engagement and thumbnail direction. Narrative Polish, keeping it in prose form but elevating flow, clarity, and pacing for a docubook or article. The continuation of next scene, I extend the next chronological segment after car discovery, autopsy report, restarted investigation, suspect link. Elizabeth hadn't disappeared without a trace. She'd been there the whole time, under the river that flowed calmly through her town. And when her car was eventually dredged from the murky riverbed, the tale went viral. Journalists descended upon Parsippany, tents erected along the riverfront, and banners bellowed across New Jersey. For Richard Thompson, the moment was relief mixed with heartbreak. At the water's edge, his voice shook as he told the cameras, "I stood here for years, praying for a sign. I never knew she was right here, under our feet." The find rekindled the cold case unit's zeal. The Honda Accord covered with mud was sealed and sent in a hurry to the Morris County Forensic Laboratory, handled not as a relic, but as a waiting witness. The first report was accurate. Recovered vehicle, 2002, Honda Accord, owned by victim. Remains remained in driver's seat. Personal belongings consistent with victim. Additional fabric of clothing recovered from back seat, possible secondary DNA source. 14 years of silent speculation were finally over. No more theories of runaway children, no more rumor-mongering. The case now had evidence that could speak. Forensic scientists set to work. They disinfected and itemized every piece, beginning with the bones in the driver's seat. Teeth, still whole, provided the best possibility for DNA matching. In a matter of days, the test revealed what the family already suspected in their hearts. The bones were Elizabeth Thompson's. Richard stood stock still, shaking hands around the report. White hair encircled a face etched with lines of years of waiting. "I knew," he breathed. "I knew she never left us." While the family mourned, the forensics investigators looked to the enigmatic piece of clothing discovered in the back seat. It didn't belong to anything Elizabeth wore. Under a microscope, the substance was revealed, a heavy wool poly blend, typical of early 2000s men's jackets. This was it, the first genuine sign of another person in that vehicle. With next-generation DNA extraction, the laboratory pulled out tiny skin cells that were embedded in the fibers. When the reports came back, all of the investigators huddled. Male DNA. Clear. Not Elizabeth's. The report stated, partial male DNA profile recovered from backseat fabric, not consistent with victim, possible perpetrator. And so, 14 years of suspicion came crashing down. Elizabeth hadn't left. She was a victim the entire time. The question now, who was the man whose DNA shadowed the evidence? The sample was entered into CODIS, the DNA database maintained at the national level. But again, like in 2018, the screen flashed back with an icy message. The man had never been arrested, never had his DNA entered. He was a ghost. Yet the breakthrough was historic. For the first time since 2006, the detectives had physical evidence. Someone had ridden in that car, buckled Elizabeth's seatbelt, and steered that Honda into the river's depths. Her murder was no longer a question, it was a crime. Months after that, the cold case team had another go at it. Late 2020, they had a new system in place from the FBI, one that could scan partial profiles and even minor crimes. The DNA had been resubmitted into the system, and then it came. A ping. The database had lit up with a name, Paul Hernandez, male, 35. Bent was arrested in Newark in 2015 as a consequence of a straightforward DUI. Nothing serious, just a charge of driving while intoxicated that resulted in a fine and a suspended license. Yet according to New Jersey law, even a minor conviction meant his DNA had been retained. Detectives cross-checked the information, and the fit was perfect. The report stated, Cody's confirmed match. Male DNA from backseat fabric consistent with Paul Hernandez, DOB 1985. Prior DUI arrest, Newark, 2015. For the first time in 14 years, there was a name to the case, Paul Hernandez. The room went silent as detectives looked at each other. Nobody thought the key would be found in such a minor error, a DUI, but that is typically the way justice gets served. A careless mistake can reveal a secret crime. They started to dig into Hernandez's history. Born in 1985, grew up in Newark, lived a mere 20 miles from Parsippany. High school dropout, menial jobs, problem drinking. Arrests for public disorder and barroom brawls, but nothing so severe that he ended up in jail. To everyone except the police, Paul Hernandez was just another face in the crowd, a nobody. But his DNA was on the clothing inside Elizabeth Thompson's car. The cold case team's report summed it up perfectly. For the first time since 2006, we have a suspect with a confirmed forensic link. This case is no longer speculation, it is pursuit. When the press broke the news, Richard Thompson stood on his front porch, weak but unyielding. He'd been waiting almost 20 years for this moment. What does it matter? Richard Thompson said softly, his tone calm. Despite the decade of grief, is that someone finally pays for my daughter's death. And that was all it took. Paul Hernandez was no longer merely a name hidden in an ancient DUI report. He was the hub of a 14-year enigma now thundering back to life. Once the DNA match confirmed his link, Parsippany Troy Hills police acted quickly, not wanting to fall into the errors of 2006. A fresh new lead investigator was assigned, Detective Laura Hernandez, no relation to Paul. She was quick-witted, thorough, and had a reputation for making cold trails hot again. When she sat down, the first thing Laura noticed was the stack of files, yellowed documents, smudged evidence tags, and latest DNA reports clipped to the top. She worked nights piecing together Elizabeth's last hours, leaving that birthday party, texting her mom, her cell signal fading on the Payic River. Then Laura began comparing the previous witness statements. What she discovered was frightening, untidy notes, lacking detail, incomplete interviews. Some witnesses weren't questioned thoroughly. Others were never recontacted. So she began locating them, one at a time. Many had relocated, begun anew, but the memories of that night still existed somewhere within them. A woman who had lived adjacent to the party house in 2006 recalled seeing some kids hanging around, but nothing else. This time, under Laura's gentle, persistent questioning, a long-forgotten detail came back to her. There was a man, she said slowly, standing there smoking by the street corner. I wasn't sure then, but now I think it was Paul Hernandez. I used to see him at a bar in the neighborhood every now and again. Laura came to a standstill. In 2006, Paul Hernandez's name had never even crossed the case file. But now here he was, potentially standing mere yards from where Elizabeth was last known to be alive. The brief but chilling report she sent to her captain read, "New testimony places Paul Hernandez potentially in the area of the victim's last known location. Timeline alignment required." For the first time in almost 2 decades, the suspect was not a faceless DNA sample. He had a context, a place, and a face in the dark. But Laura understood memory can degrade and distort. Humans forget. Details become hazy. But DNA does not lie. To advance from suspicion to evidence, she required something new, something irrefutable. So Laura suggested a stealth surveillance mission. Her crew installed cameras discreetly in and around Paul Hernandez's Newark community, on streetlights, in tree limbs, and even hidden within parked cars. From January 2021, every move was tracked. They monitored his gray SUV, his morning coffee run, his late-night outings at the bar. Then came the crack. Paul purchased coffee one cold Tuesday morning from a convenience store. He drank it in the parking lot, lit his cigarette, and threw the paper cup into the dumpster. In a matter of seconds, the undercover officer, disguised as a customer, picked it up before the garbage truck came. That thrown-away cup was the key piece of evidence in the entire case. Weeks later, the test results found their way to Laura's desk. The DNA on the rim of the cup matched identically with the male DNA present on the backseat lining of Elizabeth's car. Margin of error? 1 in a trillion. The report read simply, "Subject confirmed as DNA contributor. Match absolute." There was no longer any room for skepticism. Paul Hernandez had been in Elizabeth Thompson's car when she went missing, but as detectives were quietly basking in their success, something shifted. Paul started behaving strangely. He changed his routines, avoided his typical coffee shop, drove around the block several times in his neighborhood, telltale signs of someone who knew they were under surveillance. One night, security cameras recorded him loading boxes into his SUV, clothes, money, even paperwork. Laura's intuition told her what it meant. He was getting ready to bolt. An emergency session ensued. Round-the-clock monitoring was mandated, and an arrest warrant was prepared, faster than he could make a move the second he attempted to escape. A cold Saturday morning some days later, Paul made his attempt. He slipped out of his house in dark clothing, loaded his SUV, and drove south along I-95. The unmarked cars trailed behind at a discreet distance. Along the Philadelphia ramp, he signaled to turn right, then swerved hard to the left in a last-minute effort to shake the tail. That was the signal. 3 unmarked police vehicles cornered him. Tires squealed. Officers yelled commands.
Paul attempted to get away, but it was over in seconds. In his trunk, a suitcase packed with clothes, money, and a passport. The operation report was brief and to the point. Subject tried to leave jurisdiction. No problem. Evidence of premeditated flight seized. 14 long years later, the specter of Elizabeth Thompson's case had a face in handcuffs.
Paul Hernandez was no longer a minor name in a dusty old DUI file. He was the prime suspect, the man thought to have murdered Elizabeth. And for Richard Thompson, sitting in his placid house viewing the telecast, there was no party, only a tired breath of relief. One of the most haunting breakthroughs did not come via DNA or fingerprints, but from Paul Hernandez's old computer. Deep within the hard drive which was recovered, investigators unearthed remnants of his browser cache in 2006. The majority of original files were gone for good, deleted long ago, but remnants of data still existed, like specters of his past online. And what they showed silenced each detective present in that room. Search after search, entered just days prior to Elizabeth's disappearance, read as a handbook on a crime, how to dispose of a car in river without trace, best way to sink vehicle fast, remove fingerprints from seatbelt buckle. Each of these questions was dated October 12th and 13th, 2006. For Detective Laura Hernandez, this was more than evidence. It was premeditation, right under her nose. Paul had not acted in the spur of the moment. He had planned it out. He had studied it. But that wasn't the end of what they discovered. Digital forensics revealed a secret draft of an anonymous email that was sent in May 2007, several months since Elizabeth went missing. At that time, there were rumors that she'd been spotted in Philadelphia. The email, which was sent to the Thompson family's public tip email address, stated simply, "Elizabeth ran away. Stop looking. She doesn't want to come back." When this happened, the Thompsons wrote it off as a heartless hoax. But now, with technology that hadn't been around then, investigators tracked the IP address directly to the Newark home of Paul Hernandez. He hadn't killed Elizabeth. He'd attempted to destroy her truth. When Laura read the report out loud in teen meetings, she read with cold, unbreakable voice, "He didn't just murder Elizabeth. He attempted to murder the truth, too." Those few words lay thick in the air. From a few neglected keywords and an old forgotten email, detectives had constructed an electronic image of a man who schemed, carried it out, and then spun the story, drawing a smokescreen that had fooled a bereaved family for 14 years. Richard Thompson sat quietly for a long moment when he heard the news. Then, in a deep, even tone, he spoke, "All along we were misdirected. Now everybody will know who constructed the deception." The cold case unit summed it up in simple terms: digital forensic evidence establishes premeditation and post-crime dishonesty by Paul Hernandez. Admissible in court evidence. At last, the puzzle pieces were locking into place. DNA from the car's backseat. Search history about sinking a vehicle. The false email to cover his tracks. Together, they painted a damning picture of Paul Hernandez's 14-year deception. Morris County prosecutor Stephen Malloy filed the case, laying out the evidence point by point. Paul's DNA was found on both the 2021 coffee mug and the 2006 car upholstery. His browser history indicated him looking up how to undo evidence prior to Elizabeth's disappearance. The 2007 email came directly to his home IP, demonstrating intentional misdirection. A new witness was present near the birthday party on the fateful night in October. Malloy's words in court were succinct and incisive. "This is no longer theory. This is direct evidence. Paul Hernandez must face justice." In a closed preliminary hearing, one Newark federal judge scrutinized each exhibit, the chilling browser printout stating how to dump a car in river without trace. Then, in a decisive motion of his pen, he signed the arrest warrant stamped with the federal court seal. It was something the Thompson family had been waiting nearly 2 decades to witness. The warrant was kept confidential that evening to avoid leaks, but police were already moving. A task force of federal agents partnered with Parsippany Troy Hills Police to officially serve the warrant in Newark. But as the documents moved through federal computer databases, it set something into motion. In 2004, 2 years before Elizabeth went missing, another young woman, Marissa Lopez, had gone missing after a party in Bergen County, barely 30 miles from where Elizabeth was last seen. Her body was never discovered, only her handbag left hanging by the Hackensack River. And witnesses? They'd reported a tall, dark-haired man smoking on the waterfront that evening. Familiar ring? The FBI immediately cross-referenced the cases. While no DNA linked Paul Hernandez directly to Marissa Lopez, the similarities were impossible to ignore. Same region, same methods, same type of victim. When the Newark judge signed the warrant for Elizabeth's case, he also approved the FBI's request to step in. Suddenly, what began as one family's tragedy became a federal investigation into whether Paul Hernandez might be connected to multiple disappearances. When Richard Thompson learned of the news, he was shocked, torn between relief and terror. Had Paul injured others also? Detective Laura Hernandez, grasping the thick case file against her chest, spoke almost to herself. After 14 years, it's finally happening. November 12th, 2020, on a cold evening as dusk fell over Newark's empty streets, there were unmarked county and federal vehicles encircling a two-story apartment building. Neighbors watched through blinds as agents deployed. There were three teams who moved into position, one to block the rear exit, another at the front door, a third securing the fire escape. And then, through a loudspeaker, came the order that shattered the silence. "Paul Hernandez, we have a warrant. Come out now." Paul panicked inside. He pounded a table, yelling, "I'm being framed. You've got nothing on me." But the front door burst open seconds later. Agents stormed the apartment, pinning him to the floor. The clang of handcuffs rang through the hallway. Paul's face was slick with sweat, his eyes racing wildly. "I didn't do it! I'm being set up!" he yelled, his voice breaking. But the agents didn't react. They'd heard it all before. The search team moved throughout the small apartment, prepared to find what else Paul Hernandez had attempted to conceal. Within Paul Hernandez's apartment, the air was thick with dust and secrets. Behind an old desk drawer, officers found a creased paper map of the Payic River. It looked unremarkable at first glance until they saw red marker dots sprinkled along its bends. Each dot indicated a deep, swift bend, and one of them was positioned almost exactly where Elizabeth Thompson's Honda Accord had been dragged from the water. Then, the finding that filled the room with silence. His desk, a frayed leather journal. Its pages had pieces of disjointed, cryptic writing, dates, initials, individual words. But one page stopped everyone dead, written in black ink, the day Elizabeth vanished. Written like a sentence. Detective Laura Hernandez closed the book carefully. "Take a photograph," she said. "Seal all this." In a closet nearby, police discovered a few old coats, one thick wool polyester blend, the same material as the mysterious fabric that had been found on Elizabeth's back seat. Each item was marked, bagged, and entered into evidence. The official scene report stated recovered incriminating items, river map with markings, personal journal referring to October 14th, potential clothing consistent with fiber evidence. As Paul Hernandez was escorted out into the night in handcuffs, flashing headlights and camera flashes colored the evening in disarray, he yelled toward his curious neighbors at their windows, "They're framing me! I didn't do anything!" But the picture spoke otherwise. His head dropped, wrists cuffed, his liberty lost exactly where his deception started. Within a few hours, front-page news rolled through New Jersey. For the Thompsons, it was a heavy and holy moment. Richard Thompson closed his eyes as he was told. "Finally," he whispered, "it's time for Parsippany." It had taken 14 years, but justice finally came to his daughter's doorstep. With the arrest and the proof, the river map, the creepy journal entry, the fiber-matched jacket, the Elizabeth Thompson case accelerated into trial preparation. Morris County prosecutor Stephen Malloy reconstructed the entire timeline for October 14th, 10:15 p.m. Elizabeth departed from the birthday party, texting her mom. 10:30 p.m., her phone went out near the Payic River. 1:45 p.m., a witness observed a black pickup truck behind her Honda Accord. She never arrived home. Against this framework, prosecutors stacked every piece of proof, the DNA, the search history, the false email, and now the evidence seized from Paul's apartment. Malloy told reporters bluntly, each piece alone might raise debate, but together they form one story. Paul Hernandez abducted and murdered Elizabeth Thompson. They insisted the DNA had been contaminated, broken down by 14 years in the water. "You can't convict a man," Paul's lawyer argued, "on a rotten piece of cloth." They demanded the journals. 14 tenths done was a random scribble. The river map? A mere hobby fisherman's aid. The tactic was simple. Plant doubt, muddy timelines, get jurors to wonder if the investigation itself was faulty. But the prosecution had a final card up their sleeve. Detective Laura Hernandez reopened a 2006 lead that had been dismissed, an overnight security guard working outside the area of the birthday party. In his 2021 re-interview, his words made all the difference. That evening, he testified, "I observed Elizabeth get into a car. The fellow with it, I'm sure it was Paul Hernandez. He lit a cigarette beside a street lamp. The light illumined his face. I recall it vividly." It was the missing link prosecutors had been looking for, a live witness placing Paul at the scene with Elizabeth. Newspaper headlines went wild. Witness says he saw Elizabeth get into Paul Hernandez's car the evening she disappeared. Parsippany exploded, some in congratulations that justice was around the corner, others wanting to know why it took 14 years for this witness testimony to surface. But either way, the case was airtight. By morning, news teams clogged the steps of the Morris County Courthouse. Satellite trucks, television camera tripods, and chattering crowds filled the spring air. Inside, 12 jurors took their seats, silent, focused, ready to witness a trial 14 years in the making. Paul Hernandez walked in wearing an orange jumpsuit, his face drawn, muttering again and again, "I'm being framed." But this time, nobody believed him. Prosecutor Malloy opened the proceedings with a steady voice, walking the jury through that October night, Elizabeth departing from the party. The last message to her mother. The final ring of her phone by the river. He held up pictures of the recovered Honda Accord and the piece of fabric. "We have the DNA," he said. "We have the internet history. We have the email he sent to deceive a grieving family. We have the journal that reads 14/10 done." Malloy's last line resonated in the courtroom. "We don't do theories anymore. We do science, we have data, we have witnesses, and we have the truth." The defense pushed back hard. "You're attempting to convict a man on the basis of a car that was underwater for 14 years, the lead counsel argued. "No murder weapon, no witness to the actual act," to which the prosecution summoned Dr. Samuel Klein, a preeminent forensic biologist. Facing the jury, Klein described how polyester fibers retain DNA in anaerobic river mud, settings where organic breakdown slows significantly. He presented charts and graphs, distilling it into simple terms, the science behind a story that would not go away. As jurors leaned forward, it became clear this case was no longer a mystery of chance. It was a tapestry of evidence methodically woven that led to one man and one night in 2006. Beautiful, you've reached the final and most powerful act of your 20,000-word true crime narrative. This closing section has everything a long-form YouTube audience loves: confession, justice, community closure, and a haunting final message. Before I write your reworded cinematic YouTube-esque version of this final segment, please let me know what you'd have me create next. Rephrased YouTube script, voiceover ready, reworded in the same passionate, conversational style for your 50-plus American audience, with all the courtroom tension and resolution lingering.